So now we're going to have a look at the insert effects. Now, as we know, there are two types of effects in Massive X. Insert effects located here, and then our stereo effects located here. So you can see A, B, and C corresponds to our insert effects, and they're located down here in the router. Now I've got this Massive X blank preset loaded, and that means that we've got no routing set up, so I can actually just go through and add in the insert effects quickly and demonstrate them easily without having to kind of unlink things. But you can see that the A, B, and C corresponds to this A, B, and C down here. And when I select an insert effect, you can see it's selected down here. Okay, so 3 of them. And for each insert effect, we have exactly the same options. Now, these insert effects are located in the polyphonic area, so they work on a voice-by-voice basis, as opposed to the stereo effects, which work on the voice mix. Now, we can chain these insert effects anywhere within our voice structure, and the position they have in our routing structure is going to be very important. For example, if we distort an oscillator and then filter it, that's going to be a different sound to distorting a filtered oscillator. Because in one case, we're adding harmonics and then removing them using a filter. In the second case, we're removing harmonics and then adding them back in again. So there's going to be 2 different sounds. So experimenting with different routings for the insert effects is going to give you different results. You can also chain all 3 together if you wanted to. We're going to have a look at some routing for the insert effects anyway, so don't worry too much about that. Okay, so from a menu up here, we can actually bypass our inserts. And as I said, we select by clicking on this menu, and we can switch them off by clicking off again. Okay, so let's take an insert, and we'll route the oscillator to the insert, and then we'll route the insert to the output. And we're going to take our inserts in turn. So the first one we're going to look at is Anima. Now this is a kind of pitch shifting feedback modulation module. So it can be used to create kind of flange comb filtering like effects. And let's take the parameters in turn. Now, first of all, the pitch option here actually selects the pitch of the delay lines. So we'll have a listen to these parameter changes as I make them. So it almost sounds like an oscillator sync style effect as well. Now the mix control allows us to dial in how much we're going to hear of the effect, as you'd expect, and feedback is going to determine the depth of the effect essentially, because by feeding the sound back into itself, we're going to accentuate the effect. Now we can also change the polarity of this feedback effect to be positive or negative. So it gives you a different flavour. Now the smear allows us to kind of smear the pitch a little bit of the delay lines. And then we have our modulation area down here. So amount is the amount of modulation and rate is the speed. And we can go into the audible range using this fast button here. Pretty cool. Okay, so next up we have the bit crusher. Now this degrades the audio signal. You might remember this one from Massive 1. So we can reduce the bit rate, and the parameters we have are crush. This is the strength of the effect essentially. Let's switch off the effect. We've got a pure sine wave. You can hear there we've got all those harmonics being added by the bit crusher. It gets more and more degraded. We have a mix control, obviously dialing in the effect. Now the norm control, that actually takes away the input signal, so all we get is a distorted signal. Go down a bit in pitch. You can hear with this all the way to the left, we're getting a little bit more of that original sine wave in there. And to the right, it's been subtracted. Now this offset control makes it more of an asymmetrical distortion. Just different flavor. And then high quality is going to activate a high quality mode, which is going to be less harsh for smoother effects. Pretty subtle. And that is the Bit Crusher. Now this utility is quite interesting because it gives you another set of simple filters here and also a level control. And the idea is that you can use it kind of in a utility way. So if you have something you just want to do in a very subtle way, or not necessarily subtle, but in a simple way, then you can route it into your signal flow to enable you to make some kind of basic changes to the sound to get it dialed in just right. So first of all, we have a high pass filter, and we have 1-pole, 2-pole, and then a low pass 1-pole and 2-pole filter. But just bear in mind that say if we choose 2 low pass 2-pole filters, we now have a 4-pole filter. And we could say use a macro control that we're going to look at later to control both those filter cutoffs in the same way. But let's take this one off for the time being. Now what this also means is that we have another way of creating filters in series. So let's say we had oscillator 1 going through our filter. So we'll take this link off, link through filter 1, now through the utility, then to the output. Now filter 1, we're going to choose a low pass filter. Now let's choose something a little bit more interesting in terms of its frequency spectrum. Let's try this dirty vowel. And let's move the wavetable position. So we've got lots of harmonics there. Now if we filter this down, so we now have some of those high frequencies taken away. So you're here with this high pass, we've now got another way of filtering the oscillator in series. So we're passing through the main filter and then through this high pass filter. So this is more like the routing we had in Massive 1 in that series mode where you had 2 filters in series to allow you to filter the sound twice. It's also a way you can have that classic technique of having a low pass filter moving around and then automating occasional sweeps with the high pass filter. But also if we had a sound that was sounding really nice but had too many low frequencies, it's just a way you can basically just simply tame some of the low frequencies. That's why it's kind of contained within a utility plugin. Okay, so let's take this high pass off. And next up we have a basic kind of VCA, voltage controlled amplifier. Maybe thinking, well, what's that useful for? Well, let's think of an example. So let's take this routing out. So we'll take the utility out of this pathway and I'll route the filter to the output. So we've got one oscillator going through one filter. Okay, now let's route the noise to modulate the filter. Bring up the filter frequency modulation. Bring up the noise. And you can hear we're modulating the filter with the noise. Now, we're not getting any direct output from the noise, because we can only hear that noise when we bring up the filter frequency modulation. But let's say we wanted a further way of dialing this in and out. Let's unbreak this link, and instead let's use the utility. And let's drag the output of the utility to the frequency modulation, filter frequency modulation I should say. Now, we have a further control of that modulation pathway. So if it was all sounding perfect and great, but we just wanted to dial it back slightly, we could do using this control here, or if we wanted to automate this, we could do that as well. So we have these curve and range controls as well. So this is basically the range of the parameter. So if we turn it to the right, we get a greater depth that's able to be accessed using the level control. Whereas if it's more to the left, the range is reduced, so we can get exactly kind of the amount of resolution to this control that we want. Now with this curve control here, it basically changes this parameter to give it a bend essentially. We just reset the range control. So it was like the bend plus minus options we used to have in Massive 1. So it's much more kind of subtle, and it increases a lot more towards the end. And with it curved to the right, it's the opposite. So it comes in a lot quicker. And with the curve control in the center, it's essentially linear. Okay, so that's the first part of our look at the insert effects. We're going to carry this on in the next video.